Dipanata, and I'll be the host for today's session. I'm a senior consultant therapist here at Amaha. I'm a clinical psychologist with roughly around 8 years of experience, and I have been working in the mental health space. And on a day-to-day basis, I interact with a lot of my clients in one-on-one sessions. And in today's session, we have particularly chosen a very interesting topic where we will be trying to understand uh, how to address our inner critics and also to how we can work towards better self-acceptance as well, right? And roughly, I'm hoping that the session will be roughly around for the next 40 to 45 minutes of our time. And post that, I would really love to answer all of your questions. So just in case if you have any questions that you would want me to answer regarding your mental health or your mental health journey, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A sections. I will not be taking any names and we will keep it confidential. And just in case if there's a technical difficulties, if you are unable to hear me or if you want to raise any concerns, please use the chat for emergency as well. So that would definitely help me to take forward with the session at ease as well, right? So without wasting any more time, let us begin with the session. As I mentioned that in today's session, we are primarily going to talk about identifying and understanding what do we mean by our inner critic. What are the functioning of it? How can we recognize our inner critics? What are some of the positive and negative effects that are there? And most importantly, what are some of the strategies that we can incorporate in order to manage our inner critic? So, to begin with, even before I get into understanding inner critic, it would be great if some of you can write to me, maybe on the chat or raise a hand, and just let me know that how many of you have, at least some point in your life, have seen yourself saying some of the following statements, right? For example, people don't really care about me. I can't do anything right? I shouldn't have stayed up so late. I think over there, I would really like to raise my own hands also. I'll never get better. I'm a failure, right? So I can see a lot of raised hand and I hear you completely, right? So self-doubt, being critical to our own self, and most importantly, the inner dialogues that we continuously have within us with our own self is something that can cripple us at times too, right? So as a result of which, without or probably with no fault of our own, a lot of times we get succumbed to the feeling where we end up saying these words to us more often, right? And that's exactly what we mean by our inner critic also, right? So when we talk about our inner critic, one of the first things that we need to understand is what do we mean by self-criticism, right? So by the definition of it, self-criticism is nothing but our tendency to engage in any negative evaluation when one or the other of our own self evaluations or self expectations are not being met, right? I think over the course of time, be it at work or be it in our personal space or relationships, we always set a bar or set a standard for ourselves, right? And when we are unable to meet and live up to that expectations, it becomes very easy for us to engage in a constant negative internal thoughts about our own self, not just our own self, but also on our behaviors as well as on our attributes, right? So when it comes to our self-criticisms, it can be of two types. Either it's more of a comparative self-criticism or it's more internalized self-criticism, right? You may have come across or seen people comparing themselves with others, right? And that's what comprises of the comparative self-criticism, right? We may look into a friend who is being professionally successful or personally successful, and knowingly or unknowingly, we end up comparing our lives with them, right? Or very similarly, and the more and more we get engulfed into it, the more we get into the negative self evaluation of our own self too. At the same time, there can also be a category of internalized self criticism, that maybe there's not an external source with whom we are comparing ourselves to, but internally we are continuously evaluating ourselves in a negative manner, right? Which can also be quite detrimental in nature as well for our own self at the end of the day. So, our inner critics are nothing but the voices or the destructive thoughts that make up our internalized dialogues, right? So, this is definitely not something very similar to auditory hallucinations, but these thoughts are just something in our own head, right? And these thoughts are very strict, very inner normative in nature, too, right? And these play a very essential characteristics for various psychological diseases, right? In depression, in eating disorders, among many other disorders, we have seen that the inner critic, the inner voice, which continuously judges us, criticizes us, or also demeans the self when even self criticism is not warranted, right? And it can exist in various people in various pattern in various ways, and it also keeps us away from interpreting events realistically, right? Either we will be over evaluating them, or maybe in some situations we will end up under evaluating them as well, right? And as a result of which, it's harmful, definitely, and at the end of the day it leads to a series of negative self dialogue as well. Moving forward, what are some of the types of inner critics that we may have noticed, right? So there are plenty of types of inner critics that we may come across. But rather than going into the much depth of it, I wanted to particularly give and set a few examples which might help you to understand that how these usually play out in our day-to-day basis too, right? So, for example, in present scenarios, the current financial situations that all of us are undergoing. Of course, the news of layoffs, recessions are almost all over the news, right? So, whenever a person is undergoing a mass layoff, and while they do understand that there's absolutely nothing they can do, and it's very much externally motivated because of which they are probably being laid off, but obviously a lot of times it happens that we start questioning our own self, right? We start undermining ourselves. We start thinking to ourselves that, okay, what if I have done something wrong? Or what if I have not lived up to the potential of my own self? As a result of which, maybe I am in this situation, right? So that comprises of the inadequate self that we may have, right? Even similarly, in personal relationships, also, we have seen a lot of times that when somebody is going through a rough patch in their relationships, or their relationships with their partners or spouses haven't worked out, right? It gets very easy for us to start hating our own self, right? We always get into the loop of self blame. We blame ourselves for the relationship not being worked out, for not being able to be available for our friends, our partners, or even for our parents for that matter, right? As a result of which, the hated self or the inner critic, where the we continuously start attacking our own self and start hating our own self, becomes very, very prominent, right? Similarly, there are other different patterns which gets very prominent, like, for example, the perfectionistic nature, right? So someone who has set a very high standard for our own self, and when they are being not able to match up to that level, they might just find themselves to be again getting into that destructive mode of continuously running these thoughts in their mind that I'm good for nothing, I can't do it, I'm just a failure, right? And these are the statements that keeps repeating and undergoing in their minds too. Other few pointers that may come very prominently are the destroyer self, right? That it makes a pervasive attacks on one's fundamental self-worth, right? All of us have a way in which we would like to see ourselves, right? The way we would like to see ourselves in a relationship, in a professional space, or even in friendships for that matter, right? As a daughter, as a spouse, or as a mother, I am playing different roles. But at the same time, there's a part of me where I have set that standard of how I would like to see myself, right? And whenever I'm not being able to meet up to that level, my destroyer self might just get activated, which may continuously tell me that, okay, I'm ashamed of everything about myself. I'm just detrimenting my own self-worth as well, right? And as a result of which, a lot of times we get into a loop of guilt tripping ourselves, right? We are unable to forgive any past mistakes that we may have done, or anything that we feel that we would like to do otherwise, but for some reason or the other, we fail to manage through it and navigate through it as well. Next is definitely how it's very important to understand that while we know what inner critics are and what are the types, but the question remains that how does these inner critics develop, right? Is it something that I am suffering from just as of now, or is it much more in depth of it? If you have ever wondered that question, and of course, to give you a short answer to that, it's definitely much more deep rooted than just a present concern or a present problem that you are dealing through, right? So it can arise from one or the other early childhood experiences that you may have had, right? So if you have been exposed to any early childhood traumas or childhood experiences, you have been criticized by your own parents or the peers around you, or even your teachers, all the fundamental and the core memories that may have formed in your early childhood experiences, that can lead to these word dialogues too, right? At the same time, there's always an internalized ethical norms and social expectations that we are thrown at as a child, right? We are meant to be looking a certain way, we are meant to be behaving a certain way, and anything beyond that norm is considered to be wrong or considered to be bad for the societal standards, right? And when we are exposed to such deviations more frequently in our lives, that's when a lot of times it has been seen in several research evidences that these kinds of inner thoughts or critics may arise at the end of the day. Our parenting styles also play a very important role, right? The kind of attachment styles that we may have had with our parents play a very important role. If we were in a secure environment, then definitely it's less likely to happen that we may have been getting these dialogues in our mind. But if you are exposed to the parenting styles of being associated with anxious parents or disorganized parents or avoidant parents for that matter, then obviously as a child you are left very confused, right? You don't know, you find it difficult to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong, right? And as a result of which, as you grow up and when it comes to a point for you to make a decision, you find it difficult to accept it, embrace it, and go forward with it also. And then, much later in our lives, as and when we grow up, the cultural influences plays a very important role, right? Sometimes criticisms are used in our society as a motivator, right? Sometimes it's been told by our parents or our peers that we are giving you these criticisms so that it helps you to grow, right? But researchers so show that not always criticisms can be good for us, right? Sometimes some level of nurturance will also be required for you to shine and prosper and go forward with your life as well. So, what are some of the positive and negative effects of inner critic that may be there, right? So, while we are speaking it more on the negative lenses, but it's still important to understand that sometimes these inner critics or these inner voice can also be a very powerful tool for us and may also have some positive effects on our own self also, right? So, number one, it definitely plays a role in our individual growth, right? It can give us a push or a motivation to do better and get better and also stay better over a course of time as well, right? It also allows us to acknowledge the mistakes and the failures, right? And the more and more we become self aware of the mistakes that we are making, or whatever the learnings that we are taking from our failures, that would definitely help us to prosper in life too. Sometimes it's also beneficial and it leads to change and humility in us, right? And it's very, very important and it's very human to know and remember that once in a while, occasional self doubt is extremely common, and each one of us at any given point of time will go through some level of self doubt at the end of the day, too. But the negative effects of it can definitely be quite detrimental as well, because it affects ourselves. It can lead to various mental health conditions, as I have already mentioned. And like I said, that sometimes it's not beneficial and can also lead to the inability for us to thrive and grow and prosper in life. And lastly, it's definitely uh, leads to negative beliefs, negative thoughts, and most importantly, negative criticisms too. So now moving to some pointers for you to understand that how do you recognize that if you are uh, having any inner critics or not, right? Or if you are getting into that loop of inner critic mode or not, right? Uh, so number one, it may happen that you have a different standard for yourself. You are down on yourself as a person versus specific mistakes, right? Whenever you are encountering any mistake, let's say your manager have told you that, okay, you made a mistake at this job, you automatically, your first response to it always is to take it personally, right? Rather than looking at it as a job and as a mistake, which is very human to happen at any given point of time. You blame yourself if things go wrong and persist analyzing mistakes, never excelling to your own standards, right? And this happens a lot of times when we have already set a very high standards for ourselves. And our first usual response is to self blame ourselves, right? That can again be quite detrimental in nature too. You focus on what isn't working in life and often avoid taking risks, foreseeing negative scenarios, right? Your focus, like it says, that you are afraid to take risks, right? And and the self-doubt modes gets activated very easily. You had a critical parent or a difficult or a traumatic childhood, now surrounded by critical partner or friends. Like I said, that it's not just the environment that you are in, but also your childhood experiences, the people you surround yourself with plays a very important role too. Number five, you constantly compare yourself to others and can't keep up with all that needs to be done, right? The comparative self criticism is what I have already referred to earlier. And that's exactly what happens where we understand that we are already always living in the loop or in the imagination of continuous self criticism by comparing ourselves with the people around us too. Now, moving on to channeling our inner critic, that what can we do in order to channel our inner critic in a better way? And one of the first step towards channeling our inner critic begins with becoming more and more self-aware, right? So sometimes it's very important to examine our own critic by understanding where it is coming from, right? And that's exactly why we focus so much in understanding, or for you to reflect upon your childhood experiences, your parenting styles, and also the cultural influences that you may have had from your past, right? So, the more and more you spend time in evaluating your childhood experiences, you can do it independently or you can do it along with a therapist or a coach of your choice. That would definitely help you to become much more aware of who you are as an individual as well. Consider how self-critical attitudes developed within you, right? So once you identify where is it coming from, once you identify the root causes behind it, the automatic next step would be to understand the attitudes that got developed as a result of which. At the same time, it's also important to explore our own emotions and feelings rather than suppressing it and putting a label to it by putting a name to it, right? So when we are just get into that loop of inner critic, we oftentimes don't quite understand and acknowledge the emotions that we are going through, right? When I'm in the loop of comparison, we don't understand that what am I feeling in that moment? Is it making me jealous? Is it making me anxious? Is it making me angry on the other person? So sometimes it's also important to become self-aware and also name the emotion that we are experiencing. If I'm comparing myself with a peer who is doing great at their job, rather than just sitting with that feeling, it's important for me to sit down and just reflect that, okay, what am I comparing myself with, and what is it doing to my own self? What is it doing to my own body as well? Am I feeling a tad bit jealous, or I'm just sad that they are more successful than me, right? And that would help me to navigate through it in a better way too. At the same time, balancing acceptance and self improvement, right? The more we become aware, the more we will be able to balance, accept, and also that would lead to the self improvement as well. Next is, why is it important for us to become self aware, right? So, number one, it goes without saying that it reduces our chances of procrastination, right? So, we are being less focused on problems, and rather we are focusing more on solutions rather than the problems. It, of course, leads to our overall growth, overall health growth. It supports physical health goals. It boosts our psychological and our emotional health. It also helps us build healthier relationships also, not just with our spouse or our partners or our parents, but also with our children, our offsprings, also with our colleagues, with our managers. And as a manager, if I'm building a team, or if I'm working closely with my team, and how what kind of relationships that I'm building with them, it definitely helps to sustain it over a course of time too. So now coming down to the point of what we can do in order to build our self-acceptance. Number one is definitely self-acceptance in itself is a journey, right? So sometimes it's important to challenge any unhelpful thoughts that may come in our mind, right? So, like we have already understood, that our inner critic may come in the form of positive as well as negative thoughts, right? So, sometimes it's important to understand what's the nature of these thoughts, right? Are these positive thoughts or are these negative thoughts, right? And once we understand that, it's important to examine evidences that refute these voices within us, right? We need enough evidences to challenge these thoughts, right? If I'm constantly feeling that I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough for my job, I'm not a good mother, I'm not good doing something good enough for my relationship, it's important to examine and gather as much as information I can in order to refute the inner critic, right? At the same time, the next step would definitely be to argue against our own critic, take away the power by understanding the self critical nature of these thoughts, right? If I'm feeling that, okay, I'm not a good therapist, or I'm not a good mother, or I'm not being a good spouse, it's very important that once we start arguing it, it's also important for us to reflect that these are just thoughts in my mind, right? And these are not facts. Even if it feels like a fact, right? When we are in that succumbed zone, a lot of times we end up feeling that, okay, these are just facts, and I have enough to prove that these are facts, right? And that's exactly where the argument against it come up too. It's also important to use present action oriented language, right? So rather than saying that, okay, I'm not good enough, it's maybe time for me to replace it with a neutral stance, with a gentler self talk. I can rather just probably tell myself that, okay, let me just trust myself to succeed one step at a time, right? If I feel that, okay, I can't do this, or I'm not meant for this role, right? I can just probably rephrase it by saying that, okay, I'll do the best that I can, right? Or I will try to put in the efforts and see where it takes me, right? So it's not that I am moving from completely negative to the positive, but I am increasingly bringing a neutral stance in the whole situation too. Next is definitely by changing our own behavior, right? And the way we deal with other people, the way we deal with our own self too. Number one is definitely it begins with self forgiveness, right? It's important that we accept the mistakes and also we practice forgiveness every now and then, right? So, even if I have made a mistake at my job, it's important that we reflect on that mistake, examine and gather information of the mistakes that we have made at the job. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's also equally important for us to tap on our shoulder and let us know that it's okay. It's okay for us to make that mistake. It's okay for me to mess up once in a while, right? And that's the best that we can do in order to make ourselves feel a little better, a little accountable for whatever that we might be doing at this point in time. Next is definitely dealing with uncertainty, right? So, in life, a lot of times we reach a stage or we are in a position where we do not know what is coming on our way, right? We are continuously confronting our own fears of the unknown, right? We don't know how to deal with a certain situation. We don't know what's the outcome it might be, right? If somebody asks me, what are you going to do 1 month from now? I really do not have an answer for it, right? I do not have a specific answer to it. So every now and then we are dealing with a lot of uncertainties in general, right? So it's important to sometimes confront our fear of the unknown and knowingly that I will not know what's the outcome, right? And that would also give us a sense of confidence in dealing with various situations in life too. Next is definitely social support. As individuals, as human, we are products of we are social animals at the end of the day, right? We are always surrounded by people. So it's important to pay a lot of attention, and it's also very important to build a solid, rock solid social support system around us too, right? It's important to surround ourselves with supportive, also trustworthy people, right? It's not necessarily you need 50 friends who you can reach out all the time, right? Even if you have one or two friends who you know that you can reach out at any given point of time, then that would also be very important for you to make yourself feel better, right? And they can be your biggest cheerleader at the end of the day, too. Next is definitely relaxed awareness, right? Noticing your thoughts, your feelings, and how you feel physically when you are in that zone of dealing with a problem or dealing with a situation would definitely help you become not just much more aware, but will also help you to deal with any difficult situations in a much better way, too. Next is definitely cultivating habits, right? While some behaviors can be changed and incorporated over a period of time, but at the same time, it's also important to have a few habits that will be able to sustain all the changing habits and all the challenges that we are trying to do on a do-to-do basis, right? So these are the habits that is very important for us, not just on a regular basis, but probably on a day to day basis, right? And that would definitely help us stay accountable to the growth or the personal improvements that we are doing for ourselves, but also would help us to cultivate it and take it forward for the days to come too. Number one, developing gratitude, right? So every now and then we are grateful for the people around us, right? Or the friends that we have around us, for the people who support us, or sometimes grateful for the things that we have, right? But at the same time, when we are struggling, when we are stuck in a different situations, gratitude is not something that comes very automatically to us, right? So we reach a point where despite knowing, we find it difficult to acknowledge them, right? So it's always a good idea for us to develop gratitude as much as we can, right? And practice it on a day to day basis, right? A quick activity could be that every morning you just spend 2 minutes of your time just to reflect on three things that you are grateful for, right? And it won't take you more than 5 minutes of your time to probably understand or acknowledge these people around you, right? Maybe you can just go ahead and just let these people know, right? Maybe a colleague who has been great help at your workplace, or a colleague who never fails to call up for coffee breaks, right? So these are the people who are absolutely essential in our lives. And but oftentimes when we are hustling and we are going forward with our lives, we find it very difficult to go back and just say thank you to them, right? So it's always a good idea to maybe spend some time and have that gratitude within you, and also sometimes letting them know will also help as well. Next is definitely self affirmations, right? Self affirmations are statements or sentences that can have the power to motivate us, and that can be very powerful tool for us to keep us sane and keep us motivated over a course of time, right? So it's important that you set up a few statements around you that really resonate with you, that is something which is extremely relatable to you. You can either keep it around your work desk or anywhere in your house, and every now and then, or even keep a notepad next to you. And every now and then, when you feel low or you feel uh, sad for whatever reason, just go back to that page and read it out to yourself. That will have, or that will give you the potential to make yourself feel a little better as well when you are struggling or having a rough day at work too. Next is definitely solution focused thinking, right? A lot of times when we are dealing with a lot of our emotions or anything that has been bothering us, we focus on the problems more than the solution, right? So it's time that we rephrase the solution focused thinking, right? We spend a little bit more time in reflecting on what are the solutions that we are looking at and how we can incorporate and work through it also, right? So whenever the next time you are stuck at a problem, whether be it at work or at a personal level, try to take a step back and think about it, that am I focusing on the problem more, or am I focusing on the solution, right? And accordingly, take a moment to reflect on it and just rephrase it by focusing more on the solutions rather than the problem. Next, definitely not the least, last but not the least, that it's important that we celebrate small wins, right? We always wait for that perfect height that we are expecting at our jobs, right? We always wait for the perfect achievement or the appraisal or the acknowledgement that we may receive. Or maybe I'm waiting for the expensive gift that I may want from my partner, right? But sometimes it's also important to celebrate all the small wins that leads to uh, uh, that appraisal, or that leads to that required hike, right? So it's important for us to celebrate small wins that is there, and that would definitely help us not just be grateful with what we are doing, but it will also keep us more and more positive around the way. It will help us to deal with all the negativities in our lives too. Next is definitely what kind of role of therapy that it can have when it comes to inner critic or self-acceptance, right? So for anyone who is here with less knowledge of therapy, so I just wanted to spend 30 seconds on just talking about what happens in a psychotherapy sessions. So psychotherapy sessions are nothing but a structured session between a therapist and a client, which is absolutely 100% confidential. And the goal of psychotherapy is to nurture your growth, where you can work with your therapist to any emotional distress or any difficulties that you may be facing in your personal or your professional life. And in therapy, it will help you to navigate through that, get a newer perspective, get a fresher perspective, and help you navigate through that too, right? So if you have noticed at any given point of time that none of your self-care strategies, none of your self-help strategies are helping out for you, it's important to remember that uh, therapy can be a great tool or a resource for you to use that, and also help you to deal with these situations also, right? So you may reach out to any therapist who have had experiences in dealing with thoughts and challenging channeling inner critics, and they would work together with you at the best of their benefits and the best benefit of you to help you navigate through your struggles and your difficult thoughts too. So, in therapy, it helps you to identify and understand the self critical tendencies. The therapist may work closely with you to understand and help you become much more aware of where is it stemming from, right? It can also help you to explore the constructive ways of using your inner critic, right? Even if you have that inner dialogue, but what constructive ways you may use them, right? And how it can be helpful for you in the long term too. Like I said, that since it's confidential in nature, therapy also provides for a safe space for delivering into underlying causes, right? Which you may probably not be able to do it in front of your professional colleagues or your friends or even your partners for that matter, right? Last but definitely not the least, you will have an one on one experience of learning strategies such as mindfulness, thought challenging, how to incorporate positive self talk, which would definitely eventually help you in larger goals to channel these inner critics and build more and more self acceptance too. With this, I'm almost towards the end for my discussion. And before I move on to the Q&A section, I'll take you through the takeaways for the session, and I'll probably leave it on the screen for all of you to take a look at as well. And just a healthy reminder to all of you, if you have been with us till now, then I would highly recommend you to take this opportunity to ask me questions about the topic that we have discussed or anything for that matter, any questions that you may have regarding your mental health, please feel free to drop it in the chat window. And definitely towards the, once I'm done with the takeaways, I would like to take a minute and answer all of it for you as well. Moving on to the takeaways, as I said, that inner critics consists of the voices or destructive thoughts that make up our internalized dialogues, right? Our childhood experiences, our parental attachment style, being secure, organized, disorganized, anxious, avoidant, these patterns, and also cultural influences impact the inner critic as well as our self acceptance. Managing the inner critic by building self-awareness, acceptance, and by changing some of our behaviors is helpful, as well as while challenging our unhelpful thoughts too. Self-acceptance is all about being open to positive and negative aspects of the self, and definitely in long term, it helps in boosting our physical, psychological, as well as our emotional health as well. With this, I end today's session. Thank you everyone for sticking around till now. I'm glad that we could finish it in less than 40 minutes. And I would love to spend the next 5-10 minutes of your time to answer all of your questions. So just in case if you have any questions, you can now also directly send it across to me on the chat on window, or if you don't want to take your name, then please feel free to drop it in the Q&A section, and I would definitely take up the question and answer that for you as well. Thank you. Or just in case if you have any feedbacks as well, please feel free to drop it in the chat window also. That would be really useful, and definitely it would help me and everyone in our team to get better at it as well. Thank you. I have okay, that's not a question, but someone said that it's a really insightful session. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate your comment, and we look forward to having more such sessions in the future as well. Yes, so I have one question. I'll pick it up. How does one start their day with positive energy and good thoughts, right? That's a very good point. And two things that I would say that definitely you can start off with having or maintaining a gratitude journal, as well as making sure that you have had a good night's sleep, right? So it's not just necessary for us to wake up fresh, but it's also important to acknowledge that how my night has been on the previous day also plays and have a huge impact on how we feel the next morning, right? So make sure that you are following a healthy routine, you are sleeping on time, you are getting up on time, and right after you wake up, pick up your choice of beverage, and just make sure that you are starting it off with a good note, right? You can start off with a quick 5 minutes of mindfulness exercise, you can do a 5 minutes of meditation, or you can even do a gratitude exercise as well, right? If you are on the Amaha app, we have a few free resources available for you also. And definitely, I would urge you to check that out. And that would definitely help you to start your day with positive energy and good thoughts too. Moving on, I have one more question. How to balance professional and personal life? Yes, that's again a very important point. And one of the first thing that, and very rightly so, I think even more so post pandemic, a lot of us have realized that there's absolutely very less boundary when it comes to our personal and professional work, as we have very beautifully transitioned into the hybrid mode of work, right? So while we understand some of the pros of it, one of the cons that comes with it is the lack of work-life balance, right? So one of my first tip would be that make sure that you are ending your work on time, right? And make sure that when you are working, preferably work it from a space, work when you are working, work from a space where that's not your personal space, right? Maybe not try to work from your bed or your bedroom specifically. Have a separate workspace. That would definitely help you to stay motivated and stay connected to your work, and make sure that at the end of the day, if you're working from home, end your day or at a certain time every single day, right? Not just for yourself, and also try to promote that for your team as well, right? That would definitely help you to strike a balance as well. When it's your week off or on a weekend, try not to reply back to your work mails or check on your Slack messages or work emails as much as possible. That would also help you to manage and balance your personal and professional life. At the same time, it's also important to have a realistic expectation. The expectation should never be that it has to be an 50-50 balance. Sometimes your work may require 80% of your time. Sometimes it may happen that your family will require 80% of your time. So it's important to also be coherent of that, be aware of that, and act accordingly too. Yes. So there's one more question, two more questions that I'll be picking up. Um, how to not be a critic to our kid and their friendly parent and be their friendly parent? Right. Yes. Again, a very good question. First of all, it's very important to appreciate your parent, right? And if you want to build a friendly relationship as a parent with your children, then one of the first steps would be that appreciate and acknowledge what they are doing, right? So the moment we put down our own insecurities on our own offspring, that's one of the first steps where knowingly or unknowingly we become very critical to them, right? Without even probably realizing it, right? So try to appreciate it as much as possible. And even if they're doing mistakes, and like all of us would have done in our past too, it's important to not highlight it or point it out immediately, right? And that would definitely help you to have give them a safe space as a parent. And the moment you give them a safe space, I'm sure you are already working towards having a friendly relationship with your child too. Um, what if we have few family members who are always criticizing you, even when you have always been positive and done good to them? It's very hard to keep up sometimes, and this not only harms your mental well being, but puts you in a state of disappointment. As a person, you have a lot of expectations from people, it automatically puts you down. I hear you completely, and I'm really sorry to hear that there are family members who are criticizing you and they're pulling you down. And it's sometimes it's also important to acknowledge and probably understand that why are they criticizing you, right? Is it coming from a, a point where they are trying to target you, or what does it say about their own insecurities or about their own life, right? So that is probably something that I would really want you to focus on and prioritize, and probably just answer for yourself, that is it something that you are contributing to their life, or they are probably upset with their own self, that could be because of jealousy or their own insecurities, right? So, are not a lot of things that you can do in these situations, but definitely sometimes disconnecting ourselves from these people, if possible, can help you to improve your mental health. Or sometimes it's also important to acknowledge it and answer it back as and when it's possible, so that it doesn't take a toll on your mental health in long term, right? Think of it as a balloon, right? If I give you a balloon and I ask you to blow, you will keep blowing until you reach a point of saturation and the balloon bursts, right? So sometimes it's important for us to keep the balloon floating. And in order for us to keep the balloon floating, we need to take some air out, right? So, so that we are keeping sane, we are looking after our mental health, and we are also looking after our own mental well-being too, right? So make sure that you're keeping your balloons floating, and keeping your expectations low can also help in these situations too. I really hope this answers your question, but definitely I would suggest it might be a good idea for you to probably get in touch with a therapist if possible and work closely with them too. All right, I will just take two more questions. How do you not let the negativity affect your personal relationships or your partner, right? Number one, you haven't mentioned what kind of negativity you are referring to. I'm just assuming it probably something to do with your professional or your personal life. So I would say I'll speak in a more generic manner. Rather, I would say that maybe engaging in open communications might help. So try to engage in a open communication with the people involved in this situation, and take inferences, ask for suggestions, build a strong support system around you so that you know how to deal and navigate through the negativity around you as well, right? So that would definitely help you to stay afloat and deal with it in a better way too. There's one more question. Um, how do you make your family members understand that therapy is good? That's a very interesting question, right? Um, and I think post-COVID, a lot of time we have come to realize that many people are accepting therapy in a better way, but still we have a long way to go. You can probably talk to them about the efficacy or the importance of therapy, and if you have known that someone really got benefited from therapy, you can probably uh, make your family member become more aware about those experiences. That can be a good starting point, or show them. And nowadays I think in social media also, a lot of people are talking about their mental health, right? Very recently our president has given an interview where they have spoken about their struggles when they were going through depressive episodes, right? So that is an a very good testimonial for us to look into and understand that even if the president or the first lady of our nation can open up and talk about depression and how they have benefited from medication and therapy, then definitely it's not something that only the first lady of the country can go through. Anyone in any socioeconomic strata or anywhere in the world can have struggled with, right? So it's not just that for any emotional difficulties, you may need to go for therapy. Even for a mental health check-in, you may need once in a while to reach out to a therapist and talk to them about your concern, right? And even if you look at Bollywood, you must have seen Deepika Padukone, among other other actors and actresses speak about their mental health journeys and mental health struggles so openly and so candidly at times too, right? So you can take up these examples and talk to your family members about it. Maybe show them a few videos, maybe show them a few testimonials, and that would definitely help them become not just more aware, but will also help them to understand that therapy is good, therapy is important, therapy is for everyone. Even as therapists, sometimes we do need therapy sessions as well to deal with the emotional load that we are taking from other people as well. I hope this answers your question. We have 5 more minutes, and I would love if anyone have more questions in mind. And thank you everyone for sticking around till now. I can still see a good number of participants, and that definitely speaks up for it. And I'll hold on to it. If anyone have any more questions, I would love to answer that for you as well. Thank you for your kind comments. Really appreciate you. All right. I'm guessing that most of your questions have been answered, and it was lovely having the session with all of you. And we are hoping to do more such sessions in the future too. And with this, I'll be ending in today's session. And just in case, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out for help. We are always there to help you to get better, stay better, and live a better and a more mindful life in general. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend. And I hope you all had a great month as well. And hope to see you in the coming month too. Thank you so much. Have a good day.